right, you guys, this is the last one, I think the last presentation of the evening, and we thought it would be good to give you sort of an overview of your local animals, the ones that you're out there seeing, and just sort of give you an idea about some of the populations that are local. And so this is really just a quick overview of some of the research and studies that have been conducted here in the area about the dolphin populations. So you guys may be familiar with or may not be. I wanted to spend just a couple minutes on how individual dolphins are identified. You guys can probably recognize some of the dolphins that you see fairly regularly. They do this, the scientists figured this out about 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago now, looking at fins and taking photographs of fins. They're like a unique fingerprint for each, and for many animals, just like manatee scar patterns are like fingerprints for them, and you can identify an individual animal over and over and over again by looking at their dorsal fin. They specifically, when they're photographing them, they use 2 rules of thumb. They look at the distinctiveness of the fin, they look at the quality of the photograph, and they use, again, scars, the pigmentation, the nicks in the fins, to identify the individuals. The advantages of this is it's relatively non-invasive. They're out there taking photographs as long as they keep their distance from the animals. They're not harassing them. It's repeatable. They can get multiple pictures over time of the same individual. An estimate, again, out of Randy Wells' shop in Sarasota is that more than 58% of the individual dolphins in the Central West Coast have usable markings for identifying them. So that's a really important trait to have, since we can't go out and take genetic samples or fingerprint all of them. Well, we couldn't do that in the past. So these are just a couple of quick pictures to show you what they do. They go out in the boat, they're photographing the individual dolphins. They collect all the information on a data sheet. They try to document the sex of the animal, whether it's an adult or a juvenile, the time of day, the temperature, any other types of factors, the number of individuals that it's hanging out with. And then the picture on the right is an intern who's starting to compare dolphin fins and see if they can find matches. And this is, some of you guys asked about the Xenobalanus earlier. There's a Xenobalanus up here hanging off the fin, and in the next picture there's more. Xenobalanus is spelled X-E-N-O, so it sounds like Xena, warrior princess, but it's really X-E-N-O. So that might be a way for you to remember it. But you can see this is a right and a left side of the dorsal fin picture, and you can see that the nicks are comparable. So this is the same individual. They also try to get both sides because there can be slight variations. You can see this wart here on this side. It just looks like a little bit of bump on this other side. They code each of the animals that they see. They don't really name most of the animals. You've heard us talk about beggar, but that's pretty unusual. This code is for an adult. The A is an adult. X is, they don't know what gender it was. They couldn't tell if it was male or female. 23 is the 23rd dolphin in the study. So that's how they do that. You can see another Xenobalanus hanging off here. And just one more picture of this to give you an idea. This particular dolphin on the top has more of a triangular dorsal fin, and it's pretty distinct. You may have seen them in the area for all I know. You can see the rake marks on the dorsal fin too. So there's been 3 studies that mostly conducted out of FSU, but also out of North Carolina State at Wilmington. And this particular study was done from Apalachicola Bay up to Alligator Harbor. And there's 2 parts to it. First, they have to go out and collect the information and go out and collect all the photographs, and then identify the individuals and figure out how often they saw certain individuals. Then they use models, these scientific models that are somewhat complicated and estimate the population size based on the information, the number of times they're able to recapture an individual animal. And when I say recapture, I mean photograph that same dorsal fin again at a different time. So from the studies in Apalachicola to Alligator Harbor, they split it into the 2 different areas, St. Vincent Sound and Apalachicola Bay. And there seemed to be some seasonal variation. There was about 182 animals in the summer, 178 animals in the winter, so that's about the same. But when you go to the more western side, you get to St. George Sound and Alligator Harbor, you've got about 365 animals in the summer and 359 animals in the winter. So again, about the same. There's not a lot of seasonal variation in this particular more population that's east of here. They feel like from that study there's at least 2 different communities. They didn't see much mixing of the dorsal fins from those 2 different areas. I'm not quite sure what that barrier is that keeps them from actually going to those two different areas. The repeatability, there was about half of the animals photographed in the eastern side were seen more than once. And then in the St. George Sound Alligator Harbor, it seems like they're more transitory. Only about 35% or a third of those animals were actually seen more than once. So they're not likely, there's not likely as many residents in that particular area. So that's more east of here. We move a little bit west of that study site and go to St. Joe Bay. This was conducted again out of University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Or is it North Carolina State? Either way. Brian Balmer was a graduate student who participated, and you may remember back in 2004, there was a die-off, and then they did some dolphin captures in St. Joe Bay, and he was one of the graduate students involved in that, did photo identification and radio tracking, and so he identified, over the course of a little over 2 years, he identified 305 individual bottlenose dolphins just in St. Joe Bay. And he found here a seasonal variation where it was a lot higher in the spring and fall and lower in the summer and the winter. The number of dolphins were there. So again, you know, the further east, the numbers didn't change that much between seasons. Here in St. Joe Bay, they seem to. Now when we get specifically to Panama City, we call it, this particular author Tebow, so when I'm talking about Tebow, I'm not talking about the football player in Florida, but Tebow. He did a study between 2004 and 2007, and he identified 263 individual dolphins from the Panama City area. 46 of those he saw at least 10 times. And because of all of the re-site information that he got from his photographs, he estimated that the population size of resident bottlenose dolphins in St. Andrews Bay is about anywhere from 58 to 183 dolphins, probably somewhere around 150 dolphins. So that might be something that you would want to share with your customers. There's probably about 150 dolphins that live in the Panama City area. So 12.5% of those 263 dolphins were seen multiple times over the years. So they're considered probably to be residents. Talked a little bit, Secret talked a little bit about group size and alliances. The most common group size in this area was about 5 dolphins, 4.9. So he made some observations which I thought were kind of interesting, and I'm curious to know, and I'm sure you guys have seen this to some extent in your outings out there, because you guys are on the water and on the eyes and the ears on the water. But he saw in his study over the course of a couple years that he saw more dolphins in the afternoons rather than in the mornings. The larger groups were seen at the West Jetties. He divided this area into 5 distinct areas, and the West Jetties was one of them. And then to get more at your question on these alliances, what he found was that the males formed, and I think that Dan got a little bit at this too, males form longer lasting pairs in trios. So some of the guys hung out together the entire time. They were never seen apart from each other in these pairs or these trios. The females were more fluid with their relationships that seemed to depend on their calves. If they had brand new calves, they would hang out together, but as soon as the calves were grown, they just weren't best friends forever. So there was also, the group size seemed to depend on the number of calves that were in the area. So it seemed like that larger groups came around, and I don't know if they're protecting their calves or what, but there's just more dolphins present when there's new calves there. So of the 6 areas that he studied in this area, the highest probability of seeing dolphins was at the channel entrance. I don't know if that correlates with what you guys see. The most likely chance of seeing dolphins was between noon and 4 o'clock. Morning and evenings, you had more like about a quarter, you had a 25% chance, 27% chance of seeing dolphins. And then he did a little bit of behavior work too. He looked at a bunch of different behaviors, social behavior, which you heard a little bit about some of all of these behaviors from Dan and Secret. The sex behavior, they're very sexually oriented. You guys probably see it all the time out there. The travel, and again, that's where they're moving in one direction. They're going somewhere. You can tell they're going somewhere. Then I want to focus a little bit on 2 of the dolphins. I really love this picture, and it goes a little bit off of what Dr. Lydia was saying earlier. they can be very playful. And surfing, you guys have probably seen them bow riding. They even ride in the waves. They'll surf in waves if they're big enough. Playing with objects. And one of my favorite memories when I lived in near Galveston was riding the ferries and watching the dolphins throw these big cabbage heads around. I mean, it was just a lot of fun to see them chunking them around. And cannonball jellyfish. Yep. Yeah, well, they think those are the same things, actually, just called different. So I was really pleased to find this picture with this dolphin wearing a little jellyfish hat somewhere. This is actually somewhere in England, but the playing behavior was, the different behaviors are also going to happen in different areas and at different times, apparently. And playing was mainly observed along the east jetties, and that was the most where it was seen, but it was also noticed specifically in St. Andrews Bay, the west jetties, and the channel entrance. Then you get to foraging. So where are they feeding? Again, this behavior, you've probably seen this too, where they do repeated dives and they're moving back and forth really quickly. They're not going in one direction. They may be swimming in circles. They may be doing a little bit of tail slapping with this feeding circles. Here in Panama City, he observed two kind of unique, not totally unique, but two kind of interesting feeding techniques. And one of them is called the carousel technique, and that's where a whole group of dolphins gets together and just surrounds the fish and kind of puts them into a ball and then feeds on them. So that's, again, them working together in a group behavior to feed. Excuse me. And the other is the wall technique. And we saw that they tend to feed a lot around the channel entrance. Well, a lot of what they do, again, is they get these groups together and they're all swimming in the same direction and drive the fish up against the jetties or up against a wall or some kind of a barrier. And that's a great way for them to get some food, too. So again, the foraging occurs at the west jetties and the channel entrance primarily, although it occurs everywhere. Then I wanted to wrap up real quick with the begging behavior. You've seen some of the slides today. This is not normal dolphin behavior. This was in Shell Island in 2009. Dolphins sticking their heads up out of the water like this or swimming sideways looking up. That's not normal. There's been a couple of studies on begging, and Thibault also made some observations on this. One study was conducted over 5 days where they went out in a boat and identified 89 individual animals. They did focal follows, so they actually, when they'd come across an animal that had interactions with a human on a regular basis, they would follow it for as long as they could follow it, for up to an hour or 2 hours. And they noticed that with the 7 of these 89 dolphins, so 8% of the dolphins that they saw over this period of 5 days were interacting with humans on a regular basis. And when they found those dolphins, that 77% of the time that they were following them, they were interacting with humans, which means that's a huge disruption to their normal behavior and their normal feeding. They also noted that those conditioned dolphins didn't stray very far from where they were. They didn't go much further than a nautical mile from that area where they were having those interactions. So that was the results of that 2004 study. Thibault also noted 19, over his course of 2 years out on the water, he observed 19 feeding events near the east jetties. So just to kind of wrap up real quick, and again, these are nuggets if you want to share them with your visitors or not. The behavior of the dolphins varies with where they are and what time of day it is. These two techniques for feeding are kind of unique to Panama City, although they do occur elsewhere, but they're kind of cool, and that's the carousel and the wall techniques for feeding. You've had more than 260 dolphins identified in Panama City over that 3-year time period. Not all of them are residents, maybe 150. This isn't completely confirmed yet. They need to really do a stock assessment on that. Again, some dolphins form alliances with others. Most usually don't last very long, but some of those guys can hang out together for a really long time. And again, I think you guys already get that. You're here is feeding changes dolphin behaviors in really harmful ways, both for humans and for the dolphins. So to wrap up, again, another fun picture. I really appreciate everybody being here. We're really impressed that you've stuck it out with all of this, and look forward to continuing to work with everyone in the future. And
I'm going to turn it back over to Dennis. But what I did want to say before we leave is, again, I want to thank everybody for coming. I want y'all to keep in mind that this is the first of an idea that began last fall. We came together with this, and this is just the beginning of an evolution of us getting together and this alliance being formed and some positive things coming out of what we started here tonight, at least in our minds. And again, we couldn't have done it without you all. And I want to give a special thanks to Ted and Dennis for coming forward and probably having the gumption in front of their peers, right, wrong, or indifferent, and saying and deciding, let's see if we can get this thing going and get people on board and get everybody together and start somewhere. Well, folks, this is the starting point, and y'all were a part of it. And I want to thank all of our great speakers from the biological side, the science side, and from the enforcement side, to give you all a different perspective and another way of looking at things that have been so mundane and ho-hum here for so many years and just common practice, that all this has been going on without much or any knowledge of the science behind why it's illegal. Why do people care that we don't do certain things? I've heard it so many times that we have done this since the 60s around here and it ain't hurting nothing. Well, I think what most people, including myself, saw here tonight was that over a period of time it does hurt something. And it hurts an animal that we all pretty much, you know, we care about and want to protect, and we want to be here for our kids and grandkids and from there on. So again, I want to thank Dennis and Ted for coming forward to us with this. We didn't come to them. We were setting up another summer enforcement effort in law enforcement with the feds and the state, and it was going to be what it was going to be. And if it took undercover operations, if it came putting people in jail, that's where we were headed this summer. However, it got us to looking, well, if we can get people on board and people in agreement with all the concepts and the rights and wrongs and together to do the right thing, we have less to do as far as that's concerned, and y'all have more to do because the tourism and the people are going to keep coming, and the dolphin are going to be better protected as well as your customers. So again, I want to thank everybody that came here. I thought the presentations were awesome. I think it was highly educational. I learned a bunch tonight, and I'm pretty sure y'all did too. I had no idea about some of these animals and their habits and behaviors and their makeup, so I thought it was all pretty cool. And I appreciate you all coming and giving us your time. I know you all would rather be home with your families, and half y'all or all y'all have done a day's work on the water today, and you came and gave us the time, and we sure appreciate it. And I'll get off my soapbox, but I'm going to give it back to Dennis.
Well,
thank you very
Ken
much.
said it all. Thank you. So he took all the words out of my mouth, but basically the same thing. Thank you.